So I just got finished watching the entire Vow series on HBO, which is about the NXIVM cult and Keith Raniere, its founder. I just have to rave about this. It was a very difficult 15 episodes to watch, and it was also incredibly challenging and thought-provoking. It starts off trying to show you just how wonderful this group, this cult was, essentially. For all the people coming in, it was life-changing. They're breaking down barriers, giving them a sense of freedom, eliminating symptoms of Tourette's syndrome. I mean, all sorts of things they were doing with their mental technology that, by all measures, were phenomenal for people. And then they just start to gently layer in the darkness that is to come, that what this founder ends up going to jail for. What I think is amazing about the series is that it gives you throughout this alternative viewpoint. Like there's this viewpoint in which this is such a wonderful thing, and how could this brilliant man ever violate his own principles? He seems like such a genius and such a moral, caring, open-minded person. And on the other hand, you have sociopathic villain, deep manipulative monster, basically. And it doesn't let you settle on either one. Now, plenty of people will just easily settle on the latter and say, yes, he was a monster, sociopath, case closed. But I have to say that choosing that judgment, while it feels very good at an emotional level, it leaves us without a recipe to stop this type of thing from happening again. And this is what's so important, I think, about this documentary series, is that you get to really see inside the workings of it. I mean, they've got footage from years ago of Keith talking to his followers, doing lectures. They also have footage of him talking privately to people about the inner sex cult. I mean, it's like, they have everything, essentially. And they the court trial wasn't televised, so they had to mock up some of that. But other than that, everything is factual stuff that you're seeing on screen. So it's like, whoa, how do you question that? Now, there's still at least five Raniere followers who have not disavowed him and still support him and declare that he is innocent. And they interview those people too in the docuseries. So you see that there is this alternative viewpoint that's constantly being compared to the grand agreement that he was a sociopathic sex cult leader who branded women and abused dozens of women and ruined their lives. I think the darkest story is this family from Mexico who he was friends with the parents, and then he groomed the girls, eldest daughter to middle daughter to youngest daughter, for him sexually. He groomed them one at a time. And certainly the parents were probably not aware of that, what was going on, but they trusted him implicitly from his reputation and the relationship they seem to have. The ideas that he's espousing are the kind of things that you would learn in self-help, in psychology, in Landmark Forum or something. It's like these were deep insights, and what he's doing is something that on the surface level I completely support, which is to break down our cultural reality, to break down our assumptions about what is true. Even monogamy and right and wrong in certain contexts. It's like, well, why is that the default? Why do we believe that is true? And that sort of shedding of this reality to see a deeper, more honest version of reality, that is a noble work that many of us, including philosophers and psychologists and mystics in particular, all spiritual wisdom gurus, essentially are trying to do, is to break this stuff apart. And he developed a very effective teaching to do that for people. The problem with doing that is not that you shouldn't do it, but the problem with doing that is that you have to create such a safe container that is rarely created. Because when you take the culture away, the moral guideposts for people's behavior, you have to replace it with a new structure, or most people will falter. Most people will fall prey to the most basic animal propensities, or to the manipulation of the most powerful person in the room, which is what seems to have happened here. So he strips down all of the moral norms and is establishing a new form of higher morality. But then within the organization, he is the god. He is the head. There is nobody higher than him. No one can use his technology on him. He uses it on everybody else. And then you see that his human behaviors with all these women is a perfect pattern of a sexual predator. Well, not when I say a sexual predator, I don't mean like a rapist or something like that. But is it like Harvey Weinstein? Yeah, it's a lot like Harvey Weinstein. Now, I'm sure that the people in the cult would say, well, he framed it differently. It wasn't as blunt, or, I bet he was better than Harvey Weinstein at being very crafty and very, smooth in his manipulations, because he was so psychologically astute. But the pattern that is left in his wake is a bunch of damaged women. Abused and damaged women who did not know how to say no, because he'd pressed their buttons and manipulated them in such ways that they didn't see another option. And that is an undeniable reality. So there's this idea that's set up in the series in the last episode that's around Allison Mack, one of the top recruiters within the sex cult, who is very into Tantra. And it sort of is suggested that Keith Raniere was using this sort of Tantra philosophy, or I would say twisting it, in order to justify all these women sleeping only with him. And that's why if they took interest in some other man, or they slept with somebody else, they had violated his trust. But of course he was sleeping with all of them, right? I think this is fascinating, and this is why one could still hold out the alternate viewpoint, as twisted as it may seem, that this was all for spiritual growth, that this was all a mental expansion practice. I don't buy it, but you can see some of the logical angles on it, because if you're like, oh, well, your feelings of jealousy for me are limits, or blocks for you mentally, like you need to get over that. Right? You can see how manipulative that is, but you could also at the same time think to yourself, if you were buying into it, well, that's logical. Like, I don't want to be controlled by my fears and my insecurities, right? And so if you believed that going through this process and only sleeping with Keith Raniere, you would arrive at some higher spiritual state, well, then the whole thing is legit. It's legit, if that's your viewpoint. And perhaps that is still the viewpoint of some of the people in the organization that haven't disavowed him. Maybe Keith Raniere, in his mind, who still thinks he's innocent, is twisting it all. He's like, no. Like, these were all agreements that we had. I never forced anyone against their will to do anything. Everything was consensual, although I did have leverage over all of them, dramatic leverage, and I groomed many of them for years, and but they were completely free to leave anytime they wanted. Right? So this is where it's like, wow, that is wackadoodle. But I think it's really important that we note this, because this is essentially the unspoken argument that this was legit, that somehow this sexual submission to one guru was good for everybody, and that they agreed to that, and that's why they were there. and that it was a virtuous act to submit to his will. But I feel, once again, that this is the oldest trick in the book. This is like ancient Upanishadic Tantra being twisted to benefit a sex addict. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. That's the closest thing that the evidence suggests. And let's just say that he was also a kind of a brilliant guy who was trying to help people, but he had a deep sex addiction and some twistedness and some sociopathy, and that he just wanted to get more power, more sense of control and dominance over other people, and that's how he got off in his brain. I want to point this out too, because I've been studying narcissism for a while now. I think that this is very much a natural outflow of a narcissist with too much power. Because if someone's very narcissistic and sociopathic, or they've lost all ability to have empathy, then to get that feeling met of, more, feeling really good about themselves, they need to manipulate people, they need to feel smarter than other people, and they want to build more and more symbols of their greatness. And so to be a guru with a harem of women all serving him, that would be the next logical step for his ego's addictive need. And so, being somewhat brilliant as he was, he would just instinctively sort of set this game in motion. And so you see what I'm saying? It's not that he necessarily premeditated this all. It's that this is the common pattern of all narcissistic cult leaders to eventually drive their group around them in a kind of God worship sex cult, because that's the ultimate power high. Through this series, you get to the end and the trial and his sentencing and all the people who did turn on him and said, "Wow, if I didn't know, or I should have seen it and I couldn't see it." I mean, his business partner Nancy Salzman, she's interviewed for the entire second season, and she's basically confessing, yeah, like, I should have known and I didn't understand, and I didn't know how to do. She's trying to defend herself as any human being, but she basically pleads guilty and goes to jail for a few years. She's still serving time right now. The genius of this for me is that you're trying to see it from both perspectives. At least I was. and it's pulling your mind apart a little bit. What I see is that when you do, like Keith Raniere did, take apart people's reality, their normal constructs for society, for culture and civilization, what you get is a vacuum. And in that vacuum, what will fill the spot, what will rush in to fill it, is the most basic of animal propensities. It is like the cult, the alpha male, who dominates all the others in the group. And that's what he created, was a kind of, a cult, which essentially is, one charismatic leader or a godlike, individual who everyone follows and no one questions. And that structure, I think, we can see in all of the sex cults. It's like the same pattern every single time. And this is what I'm saying. Like, we could just say, "Oh, thank God he's in jail. He's a menace to society. He was an evil predator and a monster." But I don't think that helps us very much, because while his actions were monstrous, he is a human being. And you can see that in the docuseries. He's pretty much a human being. He could be a sociopath, maybe is likely a sociopath. but he definitely is human. And if we look at the behavior and how he had no one to challenge his power within the organization, and that is why he metastasized from, simply a small-time narcissistic sociopath into essentially someone with a God complex and was manipulating and creating this sex trafficked cult within the organization. This is a universal pattern. And I think this is the great danger of many spiritual, mystical teaching organizations that has to be policed against structurally. You cannot have one charismatic leader at the helm of an organization without a very strong counterpoint who is the counterpoint, the moral counterpoint to make sure that person does not abuse their power. It is very simple. You have to have checks and balances in the organization, or rotate that teacher out of the organization periodically so someone else is actually, there's a shift in power, just like we do with politics, right? You've got to rotate the power, or this kind of stuff happens over and over again like clockwork. And so I highly recommend the series. It is, again, hard to watch because there's some graphic descriptions of pretty ugly stuff. But as far as just a documentary that makes you think, that makes you hold back judgment and try to see things more clearly, I think it does a profoundly excellent job.